What are some key highlights that you learned from this report about the Latin American digital economy? I'm curious what surprised you.
Hi, Emily. Nice to see you. There's definitely a lot to unpack. In this report that we just published yesterday, probably the key story, the big headline, which sort of underlines investing, is that the pandemic tech boom has been sticky in Latin America. And this is a huge deal because in the US, we saw a bit of a reversal of the historical trend, or back to the historical trend in tech. Whereas in Latin America, and particularly in Brazil, we seem to have sort of jumped ahead. Brazil e-commerce, for instance, is 3 years sort of ahead of the plan. That sort of growth curve has shifted up 3 years, and that obviously has driven a tremendous amount of activity and acceleration in tech there. And there are some pretty interesting and borderline absurd stats that I think are worth talking about. So one of them, this is sort of part of the e-commerce branch, if you will, is grocery delivery. So groceries delivery in Brazil, as sort of measured by iFood, which is the largest player locally, saw a 6 times jump, like right at the beginning of the pandemic. And then since that, it's grown an extra 10 times, right? So 60 times jump between the beginning of the pandemic and now, and that's basically a sustained sort of new level. Another big one is telemedicine, which is obviously pretty understandable. But virtual appointments in Brazil, as measured by one of the leading players, a company called Conexta Saúde, 10x'd in the first year of the pandemic, and then doubled since that, right? So it's like a 20x jump from the beginning of times. And these are sustained new levels, which is really exciting.
Interesting. I'm curious how this is influencing where you and Atlantico are placing your bets, because you're learning about these new trends. At the same time, we're going into a massive macroeconomic downturn, and I wonder how that's uniquely impacting Latin America.
Yeah. So I think a few things are shifting, and I would probably look at the venture investing scene specifically. So, without a doubt, investment has gone down as compared to what happened in 2021 and 2020 as a result of sort of this new economic reality. So investment slowed down in Latin America. In particular, we've noticed that foreign investors, they've remained active in the region, but they're pulling back a little. But what's happened is that the local funds are sort of making up the difference, right? And this is directly in response to this sort of lasting tech boom post-pandemic. It's sort of the excitement remains, if you will. So valuations have gone down, but investment, particularly in earlier stage companies, continues. There's a few other unique things happening that I think are going to continue to fuel investment in a big way. Fintech in LATAM is extremely well developed. I would argue in some ways much more than in North America. There's a couple of examples worth mentioning. First off, we saw one of the most successful fintech companies, the largest neobank in the world, Nubank, go public recently. That's a world-class story. And there's another stat that I think also relates to the investment climate, which is what's happening with mobile payments in Brazil. And it's a skyrocketing example. So the central bank launched these sort of new instant payment rails a couple of years ago. It's called Pix. And Pix is in some ways very similar to UPI in India, which everybody talks about. But what happened in Brazil that was interesting and different is Pix got to 1 billion transactions per month in just under a year, which was a quarter of the time it took UPI to get to that same billion a month, transaction level in China, in India. And India has 6 times the population of Brazil, right? So that changes consumer habits. It makes it a lot easier for e-commerce and and offline to online, online to offline sort of patterns to play out. So that has affected the rate at which the fintech sector is growing, and it also affects investing in fintech specifically.
Given that you've worked at so many big tech companies and you were more recently the head of virtual reality at Facebook, now Meta, we've seen this big shift in the public markets. Investors seem to be really skeptical about this whole metaverse thing. Facebook's market cap is now 1/6 of Apple's, and I know it was a very different story when you worked there. Do you think this whole metaverse pivot was the right call for Mark Zuckerberg?
It's obviously a hugely important question, and I am biased because I do believe that virtual and augmented reality are really in the future as sort of the next major computing paradigm. So I think it was the right call. I think the rate of investment, is I think where we could spend some time debating. Should it have been half of the investment level, for example, that it's been so far? But I have no doubt, because kind of history has kept us, objective here, that we as a society are going to go through a computing paradigm shift in the next 10 to 15 years. And the companies that have made the early investments, in the platforms, in some of the core technologies, are going to be the ones, that have, the winning horses in the next major platform race. And the thing about Meta is that Meta, is starting from much further behind than, Google or Apple, because they don't have sort of an operating system, a major platform investment in the current computing paradigm, which is mobile and sort of the smartphone economy. So it does require, to a reasonable degree, a disproportional amount of investment. Like I said, I think you can debate the rate of investment, but I think, strategically thinking 20 years forward, I think this will have been the right call.
And, more broadly, you've worked in so many different markets, China, India, now your focus is on Latin America. And I know, of course, you were closer to Latin America earlier in your career. There's a lot of concern about the global economy. There's a lot of concerns about the smartphone market in particular. There's a new iPhone out. Do you think people are going to upgrade right now when they're paying so much more for literally everything from gas to groceries? Are you concerned about the health of the smartphone market?
I am, and I have been for a couple of years, because I think the industry has sort of run out of things to do, have sort of run out of innovation space. And I'm sort of dying for Google and Apple to jump on the folding phone bandwagon, because I think that sort of unlocks potential with a new form factor. So I think there's a pretty high risk that we're going to see stagnation, as you said, in terms of upgrades for the next couple of years until we see the next major wave of innovation. And so, yes, concerned and watching it closely.
So you think the next iPhone should be foldable if they want to sell more of them? Is that what you're saying?
I think that there is a humongous amount of potential if you explore new form factors. And I think foldables have a lot of promise. I'm obviously happy that Samsung has led the way here, but we need to see everybody else, and particularly sort of Apple's creative eye jumping on board, I think, to make that work. So fingers crossed.